There are some things you don't talk about at the dinner table, not because they're impolite, because if you said them out loud, you'd have to admit they were real. This is one of those things, and I'm still not entirely sure I've made peace with it. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years in commercial insurance, and I thought I genuinely believed that the hardest chapter of my life was already behind me. My wife passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to gone. After something like that, you figure you weathered the worst storm a man can face. You button up, you keep going, you focus on what's left. What was left for me was my son and his family, my daughter-in-law, and my 2 grandchildren, a boy, 7, and a girl, 5. Those kids were the only reason I bothered to set an alarm in the morning. I need you to hold on to that before I tell you the rest of this story. It started on a Tuesday in late October. My son called me around noon, which was unusual. He worked long hours managing a distribution center outside of Nashville, and he rarely called during the day unless something was wrong. But this time his voice was relaxed. "Hey, Pop, you doing anything this afternoon?" I told him I wasn't. I'd been planning to rake the backyard, but the truth was, I'd been putting that off for 2 weeks already. "Could you do me a favor?" Nadia dropped off her wool coat at that dry cleaner over on Merchant Street, Jester's, you know the one, and I keep forgetting to pick it up. They close at 5. She needs it for Thursday. I said sure. Chester's was 10 minutes from my house. I'd used them myself for years. I didn't think anything of it. I grabbed my keys, drove over, and walked in around 2 in the afternoon. The place smelled the way it always did, chemical and warm, faintly sweet. Chester himself was behind the counter, 70-something, Romanian accent he never lost, a man who'd been pressing other people's clothes for 40 years and had the posture to prove it. He recognized me right away. "Ah, you are picking up for your family?" I said yes, gave him the name, and he disappeared into the back. I stood there scrolling through my phone, not thinking about anything in particular. When he came back, he had the coat, dark navy, long, expensive-looking, folded over his arm in a clear plastic sleeve. But he didn't hand it to me right away. He set it on the counter and then just stood there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Chester was not a man who showed much. In all the years I'd known him, he was polite, efficient, occasionally funny in a dry, quiet way. He did not do dramatic, so when he reached across the counter and put his hand on my forearm, I felt the floor shift slightly beneath me. "You are the grandfather, yes? The father's father?" I said yes. He lowered his voice, not a whisper exactly, but close. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not react, not here. Do you understand me?" I told him I understood, though my heart was already doing something irregular. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small Ziploc bag, the kind you'd use for sandwich leftovers. Inside, it were 2 things, a folded piece of paper and what looked like a photograph. When I checked the pockets before cleaning, always I do this, yes? I found these in the inside pocket. The coat had been here 2 weeks. I did not know what to do. He paused. I am a grandfather also, 3 grandchildren, so I kept it. I did not call. I waited. I asked him what was in the bag. "Open it at home," he said quietly. "Not here. But I will tell you, the paper has numbers on it. Dollar amounts. Large ones. And names of people I do not think are legitimate." He tapped the bag once with one finger. "The photograph is of 2 children. I believe they may be yours." I stood there for a long moment. "Are they safe?" I asked him. I don't know why that was the first thing out of my mouth. "I do not know," he said. "That is why I waited for someone in the family." He slid the bag across the counter. I took it. I paid for the coat. I walked out to my truck, and then I sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes without starting the engine. I did not open the bag in the parking lot. Something instinct maybe, or just the numb way your body takes over when your brain short circuits. told me to drive home first. Get somewhere private. Think. I made it home. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten 10,000 meals with my wife, where my grandchildren had colored pictures and spilled apple juice and argued over who got the bigger bowl of ice cream. And I opened the bag. The photograph was a printout, printed on regular paper, slightly grainy. It showed my grandkids, both of them unmistakably, standing in what looked like a warehouse or a storage unit. The boy had his arm around his sister the way older siblings do when they're trying to be brave. Neither of them was smiling. They weren't visibly harmed, but the look on my grandson's face was not a face I'd ever seen him make before. He looked like he was concentrating very hard on not crying. I put the photograph face down on the table. The paper was a half sheet folded twice, handwritten in ink in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on grocery lists left on my son's fridge, on the little notes she sometimes tucked into the kids' lunchboxes. I knew her handwriting. There were 2 columns. On the left, dollar figures, 18,026, tardy sex dollars, 22,000, $31,000. On the right, initials and partial names, VC, T from Clarksville, RH confirmed. At the bottom, underlined twice, last transfer by November 14th. After that, clean. I didn't fully understand what I was looking at. I think some part of me refused to at first. I turned the paper over, nothing on the back. I set it beside the photograph, and I sat there with my hands flat on the table, pressing down as if I needed to feel something solid. Then I picked up my phone and called my son. He answered on the second ring. "Did you pick it up okay?" "She's been worried about that coat." "I need you to come to my house," I said. "Right now. Don't tell Nadia." Silence. Then, "Pop, what's going on?" "I'll explain when you get here. Please, right now." He was at my door in 22 minutes. He must have driven fast. When he came in, he saw the coat hanging by the door and the stuff from the bag spread on the kitchen table, and his face went through about 4 different things in the span of 2 seconds. I walked him through it carefully. What Chester had told me, what was in the bag. I didn't editorialize. I just laid it out the same way I used to present claim assessments, fact by fact, in order. When I was done, my son didn't say anything for a long time. He picked up the photograph of his children. He held it in both hands. I watched his jaw work like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. "That's not their playroom," he said finally. "I don't know where that is." "No," I said, "neither do I." He put the photo down. "There has to be an explanation." I said, "What explanation?" He didn't have one, but I watched him reach for one anyway. The way you do when your whole life is sitting on one side of a scale and what you're looking at is sitting on the other, and you're desperately trying to find the counterweight. I understood it. I didn't fight him on it. I just waited. After a while, he said very quietly, "The amounts, they're not small." "No," I said, "they're not. Who is RH confirmed?" I said I didn't know. But the word confirmed sat in the room between us like something that had its own weight. It was my son who finally said what we'd both been circling. He said it the way you say something when you've been dreading it for several minutes and you finally just decide to get it over with. "Is she selling something?" I didn't answer that directly. I said, "I think we need to call someone before we do anything else." We called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's department. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't going to call 911. The children were at home with Nadia, apparently fine, and I didn't want squad cars pulling up and giving her any warning. The dispatcher took the information and said a detective would call us back within the hour. While we waited, my son went very still. He sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and he stared at the wall. I didn't try to fill the silence. My wife always said I talked too much when I was nervous, but she also said I had good instincts for when to keep quiet. I kept quiet. The detective called back in 40 minutes. Her name was Whitaker. She asked methodical questions in a calm voice, the kind of calm that's professional, not indifferent. When I described the contents of the bag, she asked me to photograph everything and send it to a number she gave me. When I mentioned the name T from Clarksville on the list, she paused for just a moment. "Can you read me that entry again?" I did. Another pause. "Mister," she used my name, "I want you to listen to me carefully. I need you to go about your normal evening. If your daughter-in-law contacts you, respond normally. Do not go to the house. Do not confront her. Can you do that?" I said I could. "Is your son with you?" I said he was. "Keep him there for now. We're going to make some calls. Someone will be in touch with you both. Within 2 hours." She hung up. I looked at my son. He looked at me. "She knew the name," he said. "Yes," I said. "She did." At 6:47 that evening, Nadia called my son's cell phone. He looked at me before he answered. I nodded. He put it on speaker, set it on the table between us, and answered. "Hey, where are you? Dinner's almost ready." My son's voice was steadier than I expected. "Pop needed some help with a thing. Shouldn't be too much longer." "Did he pick up my coat?" "Yeah, it's there." "Okay, don't be too late. The kids have school tomorrow." "I know. I'll be home by 8. She hung up. We both sat there in the kitchen and didn't say anything for a moment. "She sounded normal," my son said. "Yes," I said. "How does someone sound normal?" I didn't have an answer for that. I've thought about it many times since. Detective Whitaker called back at 8:15. She told us, in the careful language people use when they're giving you information that's going to break something in you, that the name on the document matched a person already known to a federal task force working a case in the Middle Tennessee area. She could not tell us the specifics of the investigation. What she could tell us was that they needed to move quickly and that she needed my son to come to the station with the original documents. She also told us, gently, that it would be best if the children were not at the house when officers made contact. My son called his sister, my daughter, who lives about 40 minutes away, and gave her a brief version of the situation. She didn't ask many questions. She just said she'd come. Within an hour, she was at my son's house on some pretense. She told Nadia she'd been in the neighborhood, that she'd missed the kids, that she wanted to take them for ice cream and a sleepover. Nadia apparently had no reason to object. My daughter texted me from the driveway, "Kids in the car. Leaving now." I read that text 3 times. I'll spare you the procedural details of what happened over the next 12 hours, partly because I don't know all of them, and partly because they were my son's to live through more than mine. What I can tell you is that officers made contact at the house that night, that Nadia did not go quietly. There was apparently a significant scene, though my son only told me pieces of it and I didn't press for more. That 2 other individuals were apprehended in connection with the same investigation, that the partial names and initials on that handwritten list connected to a network of people moving significant amounts of cash in exchange for things I don't want to put into plain language. My grandchildren spent that night at my daughter's house. My grandson slept in her guest room and asked for an extra blanket. My granddaughter asked to leave the hallway light on. Both of them ate an entire pizza between them and watched a movie and fell asleep on the couch before it was over, which is what 5- and 7-year-olds will do if you let them. I know this because my daughter sent me a picture at 11:30 that night. Both kids curled up together under a fleece blanket, completely asleep. My grandson still had his arm around his sister. I sat in my kitchen with that picture on my phone, and I didn't try to make sense of any of it. I just looked at them. In the weeks that followed, there were lawyers, and there were court dates, and there were conversations I had with my son that I won't repeat here because they belong to him. What I will say is that he is a strong man, stronger than he knows, and stronger than he knows, and stronger than I probably told him often enough. He held himself together in the way that good men do when they have no other choice. And then later, When there was finally some space to fall apart a little, he let himself do that too. I sat with him through both. That's what fathers are for. Nadia faced federal charges. The legal process is still ongoing as I write this, and I've learned not to expect the justice system to move at the speed your emotions want it to. What I know is that those two children are safe, that they are with their father, that they come to my house on Sundays and they eat too much and they argue over the remote control, and my grandson keeps asking me to teach him how to fish, and one of these days I'm actually gonna do it. I've thought a lot about Chester. I've thought about the fact that he was under no obligation to do anything with what he found. He could have thrown it away, or turned it over to the police himself, or simply called the name on the ticket. He did none of those things. He waited for the right person. He made a judgment call based on being a grandfather himself, based on some instinct that told him the grandfather was the right set of hands to put this in. I went back to the dry cleaner about 3 weeks after everything happened. I brought him a bottle of bourbon, good stuff, not grocery store stuff, and I set it on the counter and I told him, as directly as I could, what his decision had meant. He listened with that same quiet, unreadable expression. Then he nodded once. "I have grandchildren," he said again, as if that explained everything, as if that was the whole answer. Maybe it is. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy or because I think my situation was unique. The truth is, the thing I've come to understand, the thing that sits with me on the quiet evenings when I'm in the backyard or lying awake at 3 in the morning, is that danger doesn't always look the way you expect it to. It doesn't always come from strangers. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's been living in your house, eating at your table, asking you to pick up a coat from the dry cleaner, and sometimes the thing that stops it is one old man behind a counter who decided to wait for the right moment. I am 64 years old. I've buried my wife. I've seen my son's world come apart and start to come back together. I've held my grandchildren and I've watched them sleep, and I've driven home alone in the dark and sat in parking lots trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. What I know is this: you stay awake. You pay attention. You show up when someone needs you to show up, even when you don't know yet what showing up is going to cost you. And if someone hands you a small Ziploc bag across a dry cleaning counter and tells you to wait until you're somewhere private to open it, you listen, you take it home, you sit at your kitchen table, and you don't look away. I've had a lot of time to sit with this. More than I wanted, honestly. There's a version of this story where I don't pick up the phone when my son calls that Tuesday, where I say I'm busy, that he should ask someone else, that I'll do it another time. There's a version where Chester finds those things in that coat pocket and decides it's not his problem. Tosses them, says nothing, hands me the coat in its plastic sleeve, and wishes me a good afternoon. There's a version where my son, when I laid it all out on the kitchen table, decided there had to be another explanation and walked out the door. Any one of those versions, and I don't know where my grandchildren are tonight. That's the thing about the choices we make when nothing feels urgent. They don't announce themselves as important. They just feel like a Tuesday afternoon, like a small favor, like not wanting to get involved in something that isn't quite your business. And then later, sometimes much later, you find out that was the moment. That was the one that mattered. I think about Nadia a lot. Not with hatred, though I won't pretend there wasn't a period of that. What I think about now is how something goes that wrong inside a person. How a woman who sat at my kitchen table and ate my wife's recipe for pot roast and laughed at my son's bad jokes could be moving in a direction that dark for what turned out to be longer than any of us knew. Greed has a way of doing that. It doesn't change you all at once. It makes small agreements with you, one at a time, each one a little easier than the last, until you've traveled so far from who you were that you can't see the starting point anymore. I don't say that to excuse anything. I say it because I think it's true, and because understanding how something happened is different from forgiving it. What I keep coming back to is Chester, a man I'd known for years as a backdrop to my own life. The dry cleaner on Merchant Street, reliable, unremarkable, part of the furniture of the neighborhood. And then one afternoon he made a decision that took courage, or at least a very particular kind of moral attention. He saw something that didn't fit. He didn't rationalize it away. He held on to it, and he waited for the right moment and the right person. And when I walked through that door, he made a judgment call, and he got it right. That's not luck. That's character. Character is what you do when there's no obvious reward for doing the right thing, when the easier path is right there in front of you and nobody would blame you for taking it. I've thought about what I want my grandson to know when he's old enough to understand any of this. Not the details. Those can wait, or maybe they never need to come in full. But the shape of it, the fact that the people who protected him weren't superheroes. They were a dry cleaner who checked coat pockets, a father who drove fast when his dad called, a detective who asked the right questions in a calm voice, a grandfather who sat in a parking lot and then went home and opened a bag he didn't want to open. Ordinary people doing the hard thing at the hard moment. That's all resilience ever really is. It's not the absence of fear. I was terrified through most of this. It's the decision to keep moving anyway, to make the call, to sit at the table, to not look away. My granddaughter still asks to leave the hallway light on at night. I don't say anything about it. I just make sure it's on. Some things you can't rush. Some things you just have to wait out steadily, without making a big deal of it, until the person you love feels safe enough to sleep in the dark again. I'm in no hurry. I've got time, and they're here, and they're safe, and on Sundays they eat too much and argue over the remote control. That's enough. That's more than enough.